Welcome to Our Montana. I'm Mike Penfold. I got a neat program for you today. You know, we are so lucky to live in Billings, Montana, because 1 hour from our back doorstep is one of the best pieces of wild country in the United States. And I've seen a lot of wild country in the United States, and still, the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness is one of my favorite spots. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and the people who help sustain the qualities of that area. You know, the Beartooths and the Absaroka go into Wyoming, but there's a million acres of it, so it's a huge, wild area. It's got, and most of you know that the highest peak in Montana is Granite Peak, which is in that area. But it's got more than that. It's got hundreds of lakes. It's got, the Forest Service maintains 700 miles of really wild trails. It's all kinds of wildlife, moose, elk, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, grizzly bears, and today, wolves. It's just such a wide, I don't know if there's any place in the United States that has such a wide array of wildlife for people to see. It's part of this greater Yellowstone area that's got, I've forgotten how many acres of that, but it's one huge area, and it butts right up against Yellowstone Park. The Absaroka Beartooth is the largest area in the United States of land above 10,000 feet, of unbroken country. It's just amazing. The area was put into the American Wilderness System in 1978. And it got there because Montanans were willing to push in Congress to get this amazing area permanently protected in the American Wilderness System. People like Senator Lee Metcalf, and particularly Lee, but also Mike Mansfield, really great leaders that we've had in the Congress. Citizens like Bob Anderson, who has passed now, but a couple of people that are friends of mine, Bill Cunningham and Teddy Rowe, who lives right here in Billings. These are great leaders in the conservation movement that got these things done. My guest kind of fits in that category. The thing that's important, I think, for us all to recognize that is citizen work that got this area established, and it's going to be citizen work, plus working with the U.S. Forest Service and the Beartooths, Absaroka, that will help sustain the kind of quality area. And my guest today is Joe Josephson. Joe, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's quite an honor.
It's an honor to have you, Joe. I'm certainly aware of the conservation work that you've done over the years.
Well, to put me in the same paragraph as some of those other individuals,
well,
I might have to go lie down for a minute.
Well, you need we got a new class of conservation leaders. So I'm going to be. I asked you to bring some slides, so yeah. Today here I'm going to be curious about your background, because I do know that your roots are in deep soil in the Beartooths. But you're coming over as the new executive director of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness Foundation.
Correct.
And that's an important group, and they're doing good work. We're going to explore that a little bit today too.
Excellent.
One thing I know about you too, Joe, is we had the threat of some gold mines. Mm-hmm. Here, gosh, that's been a couple of years ago. This has been resolved, and I'd like to hear about. Those things were going to be so dangerous to be where they were proposed, and you guys solved it.
Well, they were right on the border of the wilderness and Yellowstone Park. There were two. At the time, I was working for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, so I had been there previous to my current position. I was at GYC for, about 11 years, a little over 10 years. And starting in 2014, these threats of foreign-backed gold mines popped up, one above Chico Hot Springs in Paradise Valley, right next to the wilderness area, and then another one down right on the park boundary, butting up against the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness.
And really rough country, too.
Yeah, I mean, Immigrant Gulch, definitely rugged. The other one on Crevice Mountain, it's called, is a little more accessible, but it overlooks 2/3 of the park. You can see the Tetons from there. I mean, it's a remarkable piece of the world. And so when those popped up, I went to work as the lead architect or campaign lead for those projects with Greater Yellowstone Coalition and other partners.
There's
too.
no way those gold mines could have been done in a benign way without having huge impact on really critical.
Not at all. I mean, not all mines are the same or created equal. But the geochemistry is such that, I mean, one expert stood on the site of the one on Crevice, and he said, even if they come up here and fail, you will have water quality problems on the border of Yellowstone in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So, that puts the fear of God in you a
that
little bit.
That scared a whole lot of people, including myself.
Yeah.
And thank you for your work on that. Hey, Joe, I asked you to bring some pictures of your background. I would like to learn more about that now that you're in this importance.
Yeah,
leadership.
Thank you. It was a long, kind of windy road to get to those mine campaigns and to where I am today. And I was born and raised in Big Timber, or I like to say born in Big Timber, raised in the Beartooths. And that background comes from my grandmother and my grandfather, or my grandmother and her, Harriet Josephson, Harriet Johnston, who's in this photo here. That's her at East Rosebud Lake, sometime before 1920.
Isn't that cute?
I believe. So her father, William Johnston, was a lawyer here in Billings, and he was the equivalent of the mayor of Billings during World War I, and founded what is today the Crowley Fleck Law Firm.
Oh.
So my roots are deep in the Billings area, and so we would spend all of our summers at East Rosebud Lake. And in 1924, my grandfather had the Bronger family build what's today our family cabin at the lake. So I'm incredibly fortunate to have had that opportunity and be able to go up there. And that really defined our entire family's life. This is my father here on the left, and
Isn't that
his sister
cute?
and cousins, Pete Trask, who is a longtime Billings, and Janet Trask, who a lot of people in Billings may remember, at the cabin. And that tradition carried on to my generation. This is me in the front there looking at one of my brothers and all of our cousins. And so this was really...
The trees grew up, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They went from no trees to they're quite large today. Unfortunately, my grandmother was a photographer, so she took all these photos back in the day. And so our history goes way back in the Beartooths, and we used to just hike to these lakes, just like my grandparents and their friends did. Peter Yagan and the Worthingtons and a lot of Greg Aldrich, a lot of those families that people are familiar with.
Yeah.
I grew up with them. They were some of my mentors actually growing up and hiking, and things like this is I think an iconic photo of Rimrock Lake before the bridge was there and before the trail was blasted in. So they would go up and spend months at a time fishing these lakes, and that's what I grew up doing. And this is my grandfather on Rainbow Lake with the motorboat. This is before the wilderness.
Oh my gosh.
They packed a rubber raft and a motor up there, and he'd go up there with Leroy Green, and Leroy would paint these amazing landscapes while my grandfather hung out and fished. Yeah. So by the time I'm around, and one of my earliest, most clear memories of growing up was, I know now it would have been in 1978 when the Wilderness Act was passed. I knew nothing about the politics, what capital W is, the Wilderness Act, who was elected. I didn't know anything about any of that. All I knew is that there was 1 million acres behind me protected. That gave me this sense of security that I remember to this day. I kind of question, why isn't it 1 million? Why can't I have that number? 1 million. So it just felt, I just had this inherent sense of the value of wilderness, that came from these experiences, I think, growing up.
Is that you, Joe?
Generational. That's me in front of the Beartooth Primitive sign. So this was, I think I'm 3 years old in this photo. So this is prior to the Wilderness Act. This is when it was just a primitive area
Yeah.
established in the 30s that was rolled up into the wilderness area in 1978. So I started, just like our family, hiking to these lakes, these beautiful alpine lakes, to go fishing. It was all about chasing fish. But being the black sheep of the family, I started looking over the mountains, like, one, how do I get to the next lake over the top? or just, and then I ended up wanting to just explore them for the mountain's sake.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be a climber, but I didn't know anything about it. But I wanted to do more climbing. But my hero, if I had any hero growing up, it was a guy named Blaise DeLulu, who was a wilderness ranger in the Beartooth District. He was a teacher in Laurel.
Yeah.
And he single-handedly brought the East Rosebud drainage and others back to life. You know, the trail now is called the Beaten Path, and back then it was truly beaten. It was like people, you know, camping right next to the lakes and trashing meadows. And I remember one story. It wasn't the first time I met him, but it was one of my memorable stories. I'm right near Elk Lake, and I hear this grunting and this scraping, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's a bear coming, you know, and I'm about ready to like figure out what to do. And then I see these like tines stick up over the willows, and I'm like, what? Oh, it's a moose, even worse, right? And then it turns out it's Blaise. He was raking the trail to keep the rocks off so that the horses wouldn't walk on the soft ground. That was my first encounter with stewardship, like the things that we need to do to take care of these areas that we love. You know, and I went on to do advocacy and other things, legislation, pushes and campaigns like you talked about. But that was my first experience with the kind of stewardship that is stuck with me. And so growing up my entire life, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Blaise. That was I had this whole plan as a kid to where I would never have to leave the Beartooths ever again in my life. And as naive as I might have been at the time, I was not wrong. It was not a wrong thing to think. But I ended up having a choice to go. I was going to school in Canada, going to college, and I had been offered, I was working for the Forest Service in 1988, the fire year, and the next year they offered me a wilderness ranger job.
Oh my God.
And I had to turn it down because I had got an opportunity to go to Canada, to the highest peak in Canada, Mount Logan, to be a glaciology assistant. So to spend a summer at 17,000 feet on the third largest glacier system in the world. And that led me down a whole other path of climbing and writing and mountain guiding that I spent 10 years in Canada.
So it's all outdoor
living
stuff.
Up there. Yep, absolutely. So, you know, Montana and Alberta aren't that dissimilar. But then in 1998, I moved back to Montana.
Did you finish a college degree?
Yeah, I graduated the University of Calgary. I went to school in Missoula for a couple of years, and then transferred to an outdoor leadership program in the physiology phys ed department at the University of Calgary. So, and then I got involved in mountain guiding and the outdoor industry as a sales rep for Patagonia. And I was doing a lot of ice climbing. So I kind of made my reputation ice climbing in Canada, wrote some books, moved back to Montana, continued to ice climb, ended up becoming director of the Bozeman Ice Climbing Festival. These are some photos of ice climbing in the Beartooths.
Joe, I hate to say, but I think that's an insane activity.
Well, as we say, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. But it's a special activity. There's nothing else quite like it. And it's not as insane as it may look. There's a lot of, and that's one of the things we did at the Ice Festival, is make the sport accessible to a wide variety of people and abilities and ages. So something that I've been really proud of over my career and has really brought me into this outdoor space. And over time, you know, I was just consuming it. I was out there doing stuff and climbing and writing guidebooks about it, climbing things like the Bear's Tooth here in the Beartooths when I got back. And
that's the real technical climbing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an amazing spot. The scariest part is just getting to the thing, really, because of the loose rocks and the warming. It's like these just loose rocks that aren't held together very well, just to get to the base of it. But so I brought all that climbing experience back to Montana, into the Beartooths, and just started doing more and more outdoor adventures around here.
Oh.
And
I love that picture. I can imagine laying there in your sleeping bag and watching that sky above you with all the whole universe sitting up there.
yeah, and this was at the end of a long traverse around the Castle Group, and we actually got really hailed on pretty hard right after, not long after this photo was taken. But that introduction into climbing that I learned in Canada took me down this whole other path of a career. Had I gone to the Forest Service, I probably would have just continued to do that and might have had a successful career at the Forest Service, who knows. But I got into all these wild places, and I'll never forget when I moved back to Montana in 1998. I couldn't have been happier to move back. Living near Banff, a lot of people go, "Why'd you leave there?" And I was like, "Well, it's not the big sky. I love it here." And I remember hiking up. The summer I got back, I hiked up to Dewey Lake and back from East Rosebud. It's a pretty long day hike. And in the 6 months prior to that, I had stood on the summit of Fitzroy in Patagonia. I'd stood on the summit of Mount Blanc in the Alps. I stood on the summit of Mount Logan in the Yukon for the second time. I'd been to Newfoundland, all these other crazy places, Yosemite. And I remember coming down on that hike thinking, this is the most beautiful canyon in the world.
Yeah.
It just really struck me. I think as a kid growing up there, you take it for granted a little bit, but it was just really
it's amazing.
Amazing. And so I started getting involved in just spending more time in the Beartooths, guiding on Granite Peak with Beartooth Mountain Guides. I wrote a guidebook for Granite Peak.
Is that granite?
That's Granite Peak there, the North Face. That's in June of last year.
Wow.
A little different there this year. But so I started just getting more involved in advocacy or outdoor issues, particularly around Bozeman, where I was living at the time and still live today. But got involved in Highlight and forming a nonprofit to help support access and stewardship cleanup days in Highlight Canyon called Friends of Highlight. And one thing led to another, and I realized that I really enjoyed that kind of work. Found myself unemployed a couple of times unexpectedly, and just started getting involved in the conservation world, which kind of leads me full circle to where I am today. So coming back to the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness Foundation is really like it wraps all all experience into one
pulls
place.
It together for you too.
I couldn't be happier to be leading this organization.
What a great background too, Joe, to be coming into the Absaroka Beartooth organization.
Yeah,
they're doing such good work. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I have a few more photos here that I didn't cycle through of me enjoying the Beartooths.
Is that you coming out of Icy Lake?
Yeah, that's after climbing. We won't linger on that too long. But that was after climbing Mount Black up above Livingston.
You are insane.
Spring.
I just figured that out, Joe.
But so I left Greater Yellowstone. One of the last things I did at Greater Yellowstone Coalition was a number of Land and Water Conservation Fund projects where we're trying to get some inholdings and private lands, like the ones around Goose Lake here in this photo, back into public lands. And we had mixed success with that. Stopping the gold mines is only part of the challenge. The other part is longer term security for those lands. For the as you said, these are occupied grizzly bear habitat. They're important for a lot of animals. So I started with the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness Foundation in November. So I'm fresh. I'm brand new.
I better not ask you any hard questions.
Oh no, I welcome it. I welcome it. These are just some more of the Beartooth photos here, but we were started in 2007, and based in Red Lodge. That's always been our spiritual home, and had an executive director that started full-time in 2010, I believe, and have been a pretty small organization, but really important to the Forest Service. So we support the Forest Service in their stewardship activities and education around wilderness values for the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness.
You guys are a very important partner for,
Yes.
one of the thing about the agencies, they are so stretched now for funding, for particularly projects that take a lot of hard work and labor. And you guys are critical to
Yes.
the Forest Service now.
Yeah,
The Beartooth.
we provide capacity directly to the Forest Service crews by hiring interns that are young people that are early on in their career who are thinking about conservation or wildland protection. And we give them an opportunity to go out and work with the Forest Service on those crews, like I dreamt of doing my whole life. Being Blaze. We provide those opportunities, and we also have our own projects where we get anywhere from 6 to 10 volunteers from all the communities from all over the country, really, who go out and we do those projects ourselves, and we teach people traditional skills using saws, how to clean up campfires, all the kind of things that are important in stewarding public lands.
You're a membership organization, aren't you? Well, I know that because I'm a member, but
Well, we rely on public donations,
Yeah.
grants, and
Maybe that's what
donations
I-
from the
yeah.
public. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a membership organization in terms of voting rights and things
Oh,
like that,
okay.
but we do welcome sustaining members and supporters.
so if anybody wants to be involved in your work, and you got some pictures of some of the work you're doing
Yeah.
here too. How do they do that, Joe?
Well, you watch this show and you participate in events. You volunteer for any number of these opportunities. We have multi-day backcountry trips that we do, but we also have more accessible one-day weed pulls. We have educational events. We're doing some fundraising around Give Big. Yellowstone Valley Gives in May,
yeah.
which is a great fundraiser through the Billings Community Foundation. We're going to have some fun with that. We're going to hopefully raise enough money to climb Granite Peak, the same amount of money the elevation of Granite Peak, and have some fun with that. So just participating, learning as much as you can about wilderness, sharing those reasons with your friends and with your peers is important.
Joe, the Beartooths get a lot of use. It's been a few years since I backpacked there, but back then, you didn't run into a whole lot of people. Is that the case today? It's probably been 10 years since I've done it.
That's a great conversation that we don't have. We could spend all day talking about. And I experience this all over. It's happening everywhere in terms of just more people. There's any number of reasons why, and just growth in general. And that's one of our goals as an organization, is to build resiliency. There's not a lot we can do about some of these big challenges in the world, whether it's climate change, extreme weather events like the floods from a couple years ago, to the growth and the challenges we have. Just like you drive around Billings, there's more traffic. Maybe, what can one person do about that? What we can do, though, is be more resilient. We can build a community of people that are engaged, that learn how to learn what a weed is and how to identify them. Learn how to put out a campfire. Here we are. These last few photos are with us working with Eagle Mount Billings, which is a great. We're going into our 4th year with them, teaching these wilderness stewardship values. Not just deep in the backcountry, but with underserved communities or people that still share those same values with us, but maybe can only do so, at the front country.
It's so good. Getting kids out, or particularly urban kids, they need to get out in wild country more than they do right now.
Yeah. One of our great, I think these photos here are of a group from a university in Texas, of all places.
Really?
So. This is their first opportunity to be in the West and experience these sort of traditional wilderness experiences, like packing in with horses. So we provide those sort of services that make some of these trips more accessible to people.
I know the backcountry horsemen cooperate with you guys.
Yes, we work with them quite a lot.
Yeah, they really are helpful.
They're an amazing group. They do so much, under the radar for most of the part. For trails all across Montana, really, and in the Absaroka Beartooth especially.
Yeah. It's a neat group.
Yeah.
So, Joe, you're a new executive director. You're getting your feet on the ground. How do you see your own personal goals for this organization, which is so important
Yeah.
to the Beartooths? How do you?
That's a great question, and it's a huge responsibility and privilege for me to be where I'm at. Like I said, I feel like it's bringing a lot of my experience to bear, and I mean, the place is really important, but I really want to lead first with people. It's all about the people.
Yeah.
You know, from a nonprofit leadership standpoint, building an organization that people want to be part of, volunteer for, work for.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3 full-time staff, which is new for us. We, for years, only had 1. So building an organization with staff and hopefully growing that and serving more communities. You know, I think in all the work I've done on the edge of Yellowstone or working with wildlife-friendly fencing, you know, a lot of in the Wilderness Act or the wilderness we talked about in 1978, those are boundaries that are sometimes arbitrary. You know, they're drawn on a map, and I think a lot about that in the work, all the work I do. And as I start here at the helm of the AB Wilderness Foundation, you know, we're obviously thinking about what's inside that wilderness area and protecting that, but I turn around and look the other way. Look out, what do I see?
Huh.
You know, and I see the Pryor Mountains. You know, we talked a lot about that over breakfast. I see the communities of Billings that I love and grew up here with family and everything in between. And, you know, the Beartooth Highway, the indigenous communities that are everywhere. And I could go all the way around the Horn, you know, and see those things. And so as our organization grows or becomes more engaged in the communities, I see us expanding our reach into the communities like Billings, Cody, all across.
We're trying to get kids out.
And continue to get kids, underserved groups.
Yeah.
We have a lot of interest from veteran groups, indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, that's really wonderful, Joe. You'll continue to live in Bozeman.
For the time being, my wife's business is there, and we have staff. Our headquarters are in Red Lodge, so we have a staff permanently in Red Lodge, so that's where our office is. We have another program manager that's based out of Gardner, and I'm on the road all the time in all these communities. So,
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, the Absaroka Beartooth is my favorite piece of country.
It's the center of my universe.
In the United States. And I'm darn well happy to have Joe Josephson leading such an important organization.
Well, thank you. It's
Joe,
an honor to be here and real
thank
privilege.
you so much for joining me here today.